Thank you, John, for that very generous introduction. Let me say how pleased I am to be here along with Tom Ridge and Norm Ornstein as part of the U.S. Leadership Coalition Presidential Initiative 2012. I was proud to be part of Impact 08, a successful effort to get all major candidates for president from both parties, regardless of policy or ideological differences, to go on record in support of elevating diplomacy and development alongside defense as indispensable elements to a smart power approach to foreign policy. It actually seems like just yesterday that we were doing Impact 08, and yet here we are again at the beginning of another campaign season. Unfortunately, threats to our security and prosperity remain. They are no less daunting and complicated than they were 4 years ago. It would be all too easy in today's political climate to walk away from this issue, and that is why I'm committed to be a part of Impact 2012. American leadership must continue to come to grips with reality and understand that international engagement is not a privilege, but a responsibility to our country to keep us safe, secure, and prosperous. So as we launch this effort today, we are again calling on all of the 2012 presidential candidates, Democratic and Republican, to commit to the strategic use of U.S. leadership. We will call on them to sustain effective support for development and diplomacy alongside defense to ensure a more prosperous and a more secure America. Then as now, the U.S. Leadership Coalition represents an unprecedented, diverse network of over 400 businesses, humanitarian, faith-based, community, and other organizations. From CARE to Caterpillar, from Boeing to Bread for the World. We've just heard from the Secretary of State and from other respected military officials why these investments are vital to our national security. It's hard to find many issues that can bring together supporters from across the political spectrum, but Tom Ridge and I are proof that the issue is one that unites rather than divides. One doesn't need to look far to figure out why this issue is so universally supported. Keeping America safe and competitive is a value shared by us all. Investments in development and diplomacy programs provide a necessary dimension to our national security. These are tough economic and fiscal times, and they're placing scrutiny and pressure on all parts of the federal budget today, especially those programs dealing with diplomacy and foreign assistance. And while these traditionally have been most politically expedient places to look for savings, we know today also how short-sighted. These investments help keep America competitive in the global marketplace, which in turn creates new markets and generates jobs here at home. American goodwill and innovation and investment are still needed to address many of the world's most pressing problems. 10 million children die every year of preventable disease before their 5th birthday. 77 million children around the world are not in school this morning. More than 1 billion people are without clean water. And over 2 billion people have no basic sanitation. For decades, these programs have saved lives, cured disease, promoted political freedom, effective governance, and grown local economies. These efforts have demonstrated the decency and generosity of America to other people and other nations, enhancing our credibility and our influence all around the world. I've traveled through many of these countries and seen our efforts at work. These programs help in a myriad of ways. Ensuring adequate supplies of food or safe water can reduce the risk of political instability, like the riots in several countries that followed a spike in global food prices just a few years ago. Fostering conditions that increase economic growth and improve standards of living in developing nations creates new potential customers for American products and future investors in our country. And prompt and effective responses to national disasters, such as the Southeast Asian tsunami and the Haitian and Japanese earthquakes, strengthen existing alliances and build new partnerships and enhance American leadership and influence all around the world as well. This is why I'm part of Impact 2012. Now I will turn to my friend Tom Ridge to discuss why he is a part of this effort too. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Well, thank you, Tom. First of all, let me publicly acknowledge what a great personal privilege it is for me to be with these two gentlemen on the dais. Norm, as all of you know, at least those of you in the Washington community, is a great thought leader and a provocateur in the best sense, challenging the political establishment to think boldly and creatively about solving some really big problems, and that's his reputation. I'm honored to be in his company today as well. And my friend Senator Daschle, obviously a fabulous record of public service, and we were talking briefly beforehand in the work he's now doing with the bipartisan coalition dealing with questions of budget, deficit, and energy. So it's no surprise that he's here in support of Smart Power in 2012 in this initiative. So it's a great pleasure with both of these gentlemen. I also want to thank each and every one of you. To a certain extent, I was thinking as I sat there, I'm probably preaching to the choir. So instead of a collection, I guess we're just going to ask you to get your megaphones out, and when you have an opportunity to influence the political process along the way, your voices need to be heard. It's not just the presidential candidates that need to hear your voices, but frankly, there's some folks in the House and the Senate dealing with this year's budget and next year's budget. We'd probably need to hear your voices as well. So I thank you for taking the time, leaving whatever you do on a day-to-day basis to joining us this morning. I think Tom said it best. Unity around this issue is critically important. And this is a town where there seems to be every single day a greater and greater partisan divide. And look, the whole democratic process is built on the notion that people can express ideas, hopefully build a successful coalition and come up with the right answer and get the requisite support. So unity doesn't necessarily mean unanimity. We can have differences of opinion, but at the end of the day, we need to come together for a common good, and I can't think of a more important initiative than the one we're talking about today as America begins to take on the challenges of an interdependent and interconnected world in the 21st century. What I think is important that all of us, Republicans and Democrats and Independents, share the conviction that despite the economic challenges facing our country today, America's leadership and engagement abroad is necessary for us to be secure and prosperous and free here at home. We know that in conflict zones, long after the soldiers are gone, our diplomats and development professionals will have to sustain some very hard-fought gains, but they can't do it without proper resources. So we have to make strategic investments in our future, because our military is but one option available to influence geopolitical events and to bring about a better, safer world. It's an important option, but we cannot rely on it exclusively. And frankly, we've got ways to support and frankly, build on the success of our military in different parts of the world. And sometimes, as we all know, those of us who are privileged to be associated with U.S. global leadership, sometimes development and diplomacy at the front end might avoid the conflict and the need for the military down the road. It is no less true today than it was 4 years ago that the global threats we face require an approach to national security that uses all the tools of America's national power: defense, diplomacy, and development. And while debate continues over the proper military strategy and troop levels in Afghanistan, I don't think there's a little disagreement on one point. Our success in that country will depend ultimately on the ability of the Afghans to govern and provide for themselves. At only a fraction of the cost of large-scale military deployments, I think we need to consider those as critical investments in our national security as well. Some of you probably remember Charlie Wilson's War. I think Tom and I served with Charlie Wilson way back when. There's a poignant scene in that movie, and I'm not talking about the bathtub. It's at the end. Remember this? I think it's the most important and powerful scene in the entire movie. At the end, he's before the intelligence community. And, there's that scene where the Russian tanks are rolling out of the bridge and they're leaving Afghanistan, and he's sitting before the intelligence community, and they've committed hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to the Mujahideen to get rid of the Russians. And he says, all right, now the next phase is we need some money to build schools and roads, etc. And I think the line is, who do you think you are, the congressman from Kabul? Interesting thought. You don't know what might have happened if, after the extraordinary use of America's economic wealth, our ability to fund the opposition, fund the Mujahideen, what happens if we go in and fill the social void, the civil void, to start building the roads, building the schools, micro enterprises? What happens then? Well, maybe the Taliban overwhelms even our best efforts, but I guess we'll never know because we didn't try. And at the end of the day, shame on us for not trying. Now, we all know, and particularly in this political climate, that there is a view that when you talk about development assistance and foreign aid, I heard it when I served in Congress 20, 30 years ago. Well, we have so many problems here at home. How can we spend hundreds of millions of dollars over there when we have so many problems here at home? Well, if you want a safer, secure world, a more prosperous world, you're going to spend those dollars because it's in America's best interest to do so. And the dollar amount pales in comparison to what we have expended when we failed to recognize the opportunity to affect social and civic change and ended up, unfortunately, from time to time, sending our military to deal with deteriorating conditions that led to conflict. When you think about it, next to executive compensation in the public domain these days, foreign aid probably comes a close second as to being anathema to the political figures. And yet it is a strategic and necessary investment. It's far less expensive than sending our greatest treasure, and that's the men and women of our military. I often think back, and some of you have heard me say this before, but please indulge me. I spent some time in another part of the world in the 60s in Vietnam as an infantry soldier, and I remember from time to time just kind of moving around out in the middle of nowhere and watching these people trying to eke out an existence at the same time we were trying to fight a war around them. But the bottom line is that I've often wondered if simultaneously while we were there, we also didn't start trying to build up their infrastructure. People eking out an existence day to day, dealing with the necessary, finding food, health care. What happens, perhaps not in that venue, but elsewhere, if we'd make those investments in our future and there. Today, those memories make me look back and think of America's leadership and our engagement with the rest of the world in the 21st century. It's far more important than ever before. No matter what your view of our recent wars, after so much American blood and treasure has been expended, after so much loss and heartbreak, we certainly have to know by now and we have to get it by now. There would be a travesty to shortchange that work by not investing in the political and economic development required to help these countries develop a stable future. In many parts of the world, it's a necessary add-on. In other parts of the world, it ought to be the initial investment that we make, and perhaps we don't need the military add-on after that. As Tom pointed out, we have to understand if you bring clean water, sanitation systems, vaccinations, schools, and technology, if you reach out to address human needs, it will certainly in parts of the world make the ideology of extremism far less attractive to those bent on the subversion and perversion of lands and people. Because what happens after the war is just as, if not more important than what happens during it. But this isn't just a matter of national security, it's also in our economic interest to do so, and that's all right to make investments in our interest as well. A solid strategy of U.S. global engagement spurs economic growth, it expands markets, and creates American jobs. It's easy to say we have our own problems, but now more than ever, our security and prosperity is tied to the security and prosperity of the rest of the world. So from time to time, during the course of the political debate, I hear some folks say, well, we've got to be protectionist. We just don't want to engage the rest of the world economically. We have to have it made in America. And I say to the economic protectionists, wake up, 21st century. If you really believe that, then I think you ought to divest yourself of everything that's been made elsewhere. And I've concluded you probably will be homeless. You'll probably be without a car, and God only knows what you'll be wearing. The fact of the matter is, we are interconnected, interdependent, the economy is global, and it is in our interest to be engaged that way. And I also say to the political isolationists, either America leads or it doesn't. From my point of view, America must maintain its leadership position, and those who withdraw inward are asking us to take a very perilous path to become a second-rate country, to minimizing our interest on geopolitical events. So either way, whether you're a political isolationist or a protectionist in the 21st century, you fail to recognize that our security and prosperity today, now, and forever will be tied to our connectivity with the rest of the world and the security and prosperity of the rest of the world. The more we are engaged with other countries, the better our economic conditions can be here at home. That's why I joined with Senator Daschle and Secretary Albright, the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition and its partners in urging robust and sustainable support for the full range of diplomatic and developmental programs in the international affairs budget. It's not a big number, but it makes a big, big difference. And I know you're probably convinced of this mindset and had this mindset before you come in, but let me give you one more idea that maybe we pass it on to our legislators and those who disagree with this approach. If we want America to maintain its ability to lead in the broader global community, to influence events in a way that's in our self-interest but also in the interest of the rest of the world, we have to understand that America has a brand. If America is a product, our value system is our brand. And part of that value system is that the world understands, I think almost implicitly, the natural humanitarian and compassionate impulse and empathy that America normally has for people with problems around the world. Whether it's a tsunami, an earthquake, whenever natural disaster strikes, we're there. People understand that. No, the benefits are intangible, but I think they're very, very important. So the other, I think, justification for making sure that we continue to support at a very robust level, I said it's a small number but a big difference, is where we are to promote it's our brand, it's our nature. To a certain extent, it's our mission and our duty, but it's also in our best interest to promote that value system that says that we care, that a rising tide lifts all boats. And if we can help you eradicate disease, improve your health care, better your schools, it's not only good for you, your region, but it's better for the broader global community, And if we want to lead, around the world, that's the position we have to take. So I'm very proud to be part of this leadership coalition, and thank you for leaving whatever you do today to come in. I'm going to encourage you to get the megaphone, the microphone, the pen out. It's the letters, it's the phone calls. You got a lot of work to do up on the Hill. So your job is to go to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. It's really my honor to be on the stage with two people who have been models of public service and problem solving for the country for a long time. And you both made the case that America's leadership in the world is neither partisan nor ideological, and it's in our national interest. Let me start by reflecting a little bit on the past and talking about today. I've been reading a lot about 1946 and 1948. The famous 80th Congress was Truman's landmark campaign against the Do-Nothing Congress. Part of the irony here is it was actually quite a productive Congress when it comes to the issues we're talking about. That was the Congress that gave us the Marshall Plan. It was the Congress that gave us the Department of Defense, that brought the military services together and reformed it in the National Security Council. So back then, at least, in an atmosphere of contention and partisanship, politics did stop at the water's edge. Quite remarkable set of decisions. Even Senator Clinton talked today about the Marshall Plan. Today seems to be different. We're seeing these partisan divisions bleed over into America's involvement in the world and foreign policy itself. Talk a bit about why it's so important to move beyond that and ways in which we can use Impact 2012 to try and create this sense again that it's in America's national interest to find a common set of values here.
Well, Norm, I thought Tom said it so well that this is really in our national interest from a security point of view in a profound way. Not only do we have the examples of Iraq and Afghanistan to point to as examples of what happens when diplomacy and development really fail. I think we can go even beyond that to the realization, as he so eloquently noted, of the not only interdependence but the integration of our world community today. We are far more integrated as a result of telecommunication and a result of modern change that interdependence is now a very relevant part of our lives. His question about what would we wear, in what kind of a home would we live, and what kind of a car would we drive if we were not so interdependent, or if we had to give up what interdependence means to us today is a very relevant question. So we are all very tangibly and palpably affected by this interdependence. Tom Friedman once wrote a line that I've never forgotten, and you probably remember it as well. If you don't visit a bad neighborhood will visit you. And those bad neighborhoods have a tendency to take American lives in a very profound way, as we've seen with all the way from 9/11 to a lot of the other conflicts we face. So I think that's the real message here, is that in profound ways we're all very, very directly affected by this, and I think we've got to show more leadership in making that connection a more palpable and real part to the American voter and the American family.
Governor Rich, let me ask you even more specifically, if we go back to the 2010 campaign, it was striking how, even while in most campaigns there isn't much focus on foreign policy, it was virtually absent except for a little China bashing here and there. You now have this Tea Party movement coming forward that includes a lot of members of Congress who've never thought about America's role in the world, who are now so intensely focused on cutting back on the role of government. How do you reach this group of people and get this message across that their concerns are not going to be fully met unless we address America's global engagement? Next question.
I was just thinking, if I'd like to tell John Boehner before I told you. It would help him out a lot. You know, at some point in time, look, they brought a set of beliefs about America exceptionalism. I mean, they believe strongly in America. They believe we're unique. They believe we got to get our budget under control. Let's set aside for a moment maybe some of the shrillness of the rhetoric, but I think they really believe in America's in its future. They haven't quite connected its people, its organizations like this and people like me and other people, just to remind them that it didn't happen by accident. America has not ascended, even in the bipolar world when we were facing off with the Soviet Union, had never ascended to the position of influence without us reaching out, not only sending troops to faraway places in World War I and II and the First Gulf War and Vietnam, but also following on, or even beforehand, taking part of our treasure, part of our wealth, and distributing it and making investments in lives of families in countries in faraway places. And I just often wonder that sense of history that I think should be profoundly embedded in that notion of American exceptionalism, they haven't read a couple of chapters. And those chapters, if they looked at them closely, they would have to conclude that the reason we are here, the reason we're able to influence events, the reason we're able, at least until recently, to lead rather than be led is because we did project ourselves not just with the military, but with diplomacy and with developmental assistance. I know this is not, again, right on point, but I've often wondered, Norm, right after our government and our diplomatic corps managed to get the Syrians out of southern Lebanon, and that whole situation was percolating, right? And we had a democratically elected government. It's a fragile democracy. We got the exodus of the foreign troops, and now we have an opportunity to help build a stable government. I think we may have sent to that country $40 or $50 million over a period of a couple of years. Who filled the vacuum, particularly in southern Lebanon? Iran. And how did they fill the vacuum and create a problem not only for us, but with our ally Israel? Is they built roads and schools, nurtured microenterprises. And so I guess we just got to try to convince these folks who believe as strongly as they do in America's unique role in the world, it didn't happen by accident, not just because of America, but we do things differently than everybody else. And we might remind them of what China is doing these days. We're not talking about that. We know it's a different kind of government, but they're making major investments all around the world. And at the end of the day, why do they do it? It inures to their benefit. Well, there's nothing wrong for sovereigns to act in what's their benefit, but it's certainly it's to our long-term benefit to remind these folks, both sides of the aisle, the reason we're unique. Read those chapters of history to explain why we've achieved this level of recognition and respect around the world.
Senator Daschle, let me turn to the Democratic Party a little bit. Both parties we know now have some significant divisions over, use the catchphrase isolationism or internationalism. We now have the additional overlay of this excruciatingly difficult budget environment where every area of spending is going to be under intense pressure, but the discretionary budget especially. And we're into what will be a vicious zero-sum game. One of the chilling moments for me came a few weeks ago when now former Democratic congressman who left for reasons I can't exactly remember, Anthony Weiner, joined with Republican colleague Jason Chaffetz to try to not just defund the U.S. Institute for Peace, but take away its charter. How serious do you see as a problem having Democrats whose priorities may vaguely include funding foreign aid or making sure America's involved in the world, but when push comes to shove, are going to throw that over the side for other priorities? And what do we do about it?
I think foreign aid and development assistance will remain an easy political target, and especially so when the economy is as soft and as fragile as this one is. It's easy. We can all get people to their feet by talking about the need to spend in the Midwest and not in the Middle East, and do all the kinds of political, rhetorical tricks we've got to gin up an audience. And it's great politics, but it's terrible governance. And I think the other part, of the story that is becoming clearer is that because of this interdependence, it's no longer an easy thing for us to talk about economic growth in the context of our own domestic economy. If we're going to grow our economy, we've got to look at where the markets are. And 95% of the export market is bound today into the developing countries. 95%. 1 out of every 7 jobs in America is produced as a result of an export. So if we're really serious about finding ways to build this economy, to grow jobs, to find ways to address the malaise we've got economically today, I can't think of a better way to do that than to build those markets all over the world, in Africa and South Asia and the BRIC nations, and trading with them. I mean, that to me is the solution in part. There's no silver bullet. But I think it's even more so now than ever before. And that realization, if you really want to grow the economy, you've got to have an export component to do that. Has to be part of the message.
Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the Republican presidential candidates and the dynamic, Governor Ridge. We know that we've got a lot of different viewpoints out there. Some heartening things from our perspective. We've had people like Tim Pawlenty speak out about needing a forceful American role in the world. We've had similar comments from Governor Romney. Ambassador Huntsman certainly has a sophisticated understanding of the world. But you've also got libertarians like Ron Paul, who basically want to pull out of virtually everything and every place. And you've got other candidates who Senator McCain said he was worried about in terms of a strong strain of isolationism. How can Impact 2012 reach these candidates and get this message across, including that very important message that Tom Daschle talked about what this means for jobs at home?
You know, it's interesting, the 3 individuals that you mentioned on our side of the aisle all spent some time as governor. And I think, referring back to my experience as governor, you know by virtue of experience how much opportunity and wealth and how many jobs are created in your own individual states. I dare say I bet all 3 of them led trade missions overseas. I bet all of them, when pushed to shove, will have the statistics at their disposal to tell you how important it was to tie their companies, small, medium, and large, to that broader global market. And as Tom pointed out, the emerging markets are great opportunities for us to build some economic success, but also these are the ones that could, our relationship would be substantially enhanced if we were also helping them with vaccinations and sanitary systems and water quality, water treatment centers and the like. So they go really hand in hand. So I think at the end of the day, and you said it in your opening remarks, Norm, not only people didn't pay too much about it in 2010. People certainly aren't paying too much about it in 2012. And we'll get, this part of this effort, we will get to these candidates. We'll sit down with their staff like we did before. They'll understand our position, and I think there's a degree of sophistication with these men and women, most of them, to accept and to acknowledge the importance of diplomacy and developmental assistance. It's whether or not they elevate it during the course of the campaign to something they run on. I doubt if we're going to see that. I think we would feel we'll do everything we can to try to get them to talk about that. But at the end of the day, folks, there aren't enough people in America, 300 million strong, who understand and appreciate that our president has the potential, and this country has the potential and has the need and the responsibility, I might say the obligation, to reach out and to engage the rest of the world. But we don't elect, unfortunately, we don't elect too many people because of that mindset, that role. You're the leader of the free world, but you also can influence the non-free world. And but I do think it's not coincidence that the 3 names you mentioned happen to be governors who probably led trade missions and appreciate very much the economic impact of this kind of developmental assistance long term.
Both of you are veterans of the campaign world, and one of the challenges we face is the media climate in a presidential campaign focuses first on the horse race and second on conflicts. How do we get past the campaign noise to try and make it clear that this is of vital interest, not just in terms of what the candidates say, but to voters out there, that and it's not just the economy in the narrowest sense that matters, but in this broader global sense, cutting through the noise?
Well, I think there's, I'm happy to take a shot at that first. I'm not being facetious when I say to this audience, you got some work. I mean, you got the Leadership Coalition. We're going to do our work. You've been kind of deputized. Organizations to which you belong, senators and congressmen that represent you. But I also think there's a role to be had by the broader business community whose future depends on growing markets overseas. I think there's a role to play for religious organizations because many of them have vested their own resources in troubled and challenging places around the world. So I think those of us who feel very strongly about the need for America to sustain its position of leadership and outreach and support have to assist the Leadership Coalition in adding your voices to ours.
Well, I think the American voter has sort of a split personality. He or she likes competition, but they also like to be inspired. I think back in the 20th century, I guess all of us have talked a little bit about the history of our country and why it's unique in so many ways. But when we weighed in with World War I, we won. We had to weigh in a very collective way to get through the Great Depression. We won that. We ended up winning World War II after an incredibly titanic fight. We won the Cold War. We won a lot in the 20th century, and I think Americans look back with great pride. Why did we win? We won in part because of American resiliency. We won in part because of American innovation, but we also won because of American leadership. At those occasions when things were at their worst, we rose to the occasion and showed the kind of leadership throughout all of those periods that made the difference. But we have a tectonic shift going on right now in the 21st century. And you can't apply necessarily the lessons as we learned them in the 20th and just say they fit exactly as we go forward. But those same qualities still apply. We've got to show resiliency. We've got to show innovation, and we probably need leadership as much now as we've ever needed it in all of American history. And I think the American people want to be inspired by leadership when they see it, and they also are inspired by the competition, once again. But the competition is no longer necessarily a war. I think the competition is China and all the other major new players out there who would love nothing more than to take international leadership away from the United States. So we've got a competitive and a leadership motivation here that I think is every bit as big and bold as it's ever been in all of our history.
I'd like to add just quickly to what Tom said. That's a beautiful, just actually a beautiful summation of what we're all about today. And if nothing else, if we can get presidential candidates, even during the course of the primaries, well, you're not going to have one, but we will. But in the general campaign, to your point, it is executive leadership. I'm not necessarily talking about smart power per se, but just reminding America that our future prosperity and our future security in an interdependent, interconnected, and as you pointed out, integrated world depends on being more connected in more ways than not. If we would accept that as a premise for both domestic and foreign policy, it would be a lot easier for us to find the political support and the will to generate the modest resources to continue the effort to build these relationships.
I have a couple more questions that we can do before we wrap. One is, I'm going to pull a couple of things together. A part of global leadership and engagement is dealing with global health, and we've had global health crises, and we've seen impressive bipartisan support through the Bush administration and on forward in dealing with AIDS and dealing with some of these problems of global health. Another, in which Dan Glickman has been particularly eloquent, and you too, Tom Daschle, is on food security and global hunger. At a moment when America is becoming more introspective, and especially if we find a debt crisis that sends us into even more of a tailspin, how can we make the case that it is in our interest in every sense to combat some of the global health crises and make sure that we deal with hunger not just at home but abroad?
Well, first of all, I'd echo what you just said about Dan Glickman. No one has been more forthright and shown more leadership in the area, and I salute him and thank him for all that he's done. I guess it goes back to some of the things, Norm, we've been talking about this morning already. That is so much in our interest. You know, we're going to have 9 billion people in the world by 2050. 9 billion. And whether or not we can feed them, whether or not all the stability or instability that comes from that realization can be confronted is really up to us. We've got a little lead time. But when you think about the fact that today 30% of all the food produced in developing countries rots in the field simply because it can't get to the marketplace, ought to tell us something about the infrastructure required. So you want to produce American jobs? Let's have them produce American infrastructure in those countries, just as China is doing and all over Africa today. If you want to really help in the most compassionate yet economically sound way to assist in development of these countries, let's develop food programs with a greater emphasis on education and make sure that drought-resistant crops are more nutritious and nutritious crops are more drought-resistant. We've got to do both, but we can do that. We have the capacity if we commit the kind of leadership required. And, you know, even if we doubled what we do today, we'd be going from 1% to 2% of the whole budget. We can afford this. We've got to do it. It's in our future as much, if not more, than it is in theirs.
And just a last question that I'll direct to you, Tom Ridge. You mentioned Lebanon and Syria, and of course Syria has been very much in the news in the last couple of days with the attack on our embassy and Senator Clinton speaking out forthrightly about that. The Arab Spring is an area that is forcing us in some ways to pay attention to that critical part of the region. Many important things happening. How do we make the case now that we need to play a role there, not only to enable freedom to move forward, but basically to make sure that we have both economic development and democracy emerging in the right way in the region?
Norm, whether we're looking at North Africa, the Middle East, or these emerging countries, I kind of go back to obviously an experience I had profoundly impacting my view of what the world needs to do at the time I was a soldier. But we have a tendency in this country, and I'm going to use the word preach, about democracy. And we've embraced it. We're still not perfect, but it seems to work in spite of all its perfections for us, and we'd like to see the rest of the world embrace this form of self-government. And we must be that beacon. We must be the shining light on the hill. That is who we are as America. But the one thing we need to understand, if you're struggling to put food on the table and if your belly's empty, and if your children are afflicted with childhood diseases, and your water is unsafe to drink, and there's no opportunity for education and advancement, the notion of building a stable civil society where somewhere down the road that stability transforms itself into self-government is absolutely lost. Because, frankly, when you're struggling to survive and for existence, those are dreams that you'll never realize if you don't live a full and complete life. So I think the challenge, again, in North Africa, along the way, there's going to be difficult policy decisions that the President and Secretary Clinton are going to have to make. Obviously, with one exception, we haven't had any military involvement, but clearly down the road, there may be some opportunities for us to influence events, and that's where this whole notion of development assistance comes in. You know, you take a look at those countries, some of them have just abject poverty, and they're still The human condition itself has not been advanced among the body politic, even though the leaders have lived pretty good lives over the years. But it's just not North Africa and that region. It's the rest of the world. An empty stomach, a sick child, just horrible living conditions. If we help address those, then that whole notion of talking about America and self-government and the value system that I talked about and Senator Daschle talked about, then it begins to make sense. But you've got to help people survive some very difficult and challenging circumstances, and that's where it's in our long-term best interest to help them not only survive, but to flourish. Then our appeal to them, I think, it has more traction.
Well, we know that Governor Perry is considering entering the race. It's clearly not too late for other governors to consider as well. But thank you both for your leadership, and I think Impact 2012 has some challenges ahead, but with the two of you involved, we're in much better shape. And thank you.
Thanks, Norm.